The earlier lessons, I showed you how we can create a bunch of random dynamic elements, so cloning existing elements, and then we could move them around. And now the problem is, what happens if you want to get rid of this element? So now you've got it and you don't like it, so you want to get rid of it. So I'll show you how to do that. We're going to create essentially a trash bin that we can utilize. So updating within our class, let's create an ID of garbage, position it absolute so we can position it somewhere on our page, and I'm going to make it a black square. And of course, you can style it as needed. So this black square is going to be where the void is. If you move any one of these elements on top of it, they're going to simply get removed. And let's position this. So we can position it at maybe 500 pixels and top 300 pixels. Now let's add that into our elements. So it doesn't really matter where it goes because as this is going to be absolute position. And let's refresh that. So there's our garbage. And we want to be able to detect if one element is on top of the other element. And this is where we can use collision detection. So we saw it before where we were getting the bounding box. And that's what we were working with in the last lesson where we were checking to see if one element is on top of the other element. So let's make that check and we'll set up our collision detection. So open this up bigger. And as we're setting these elements, we can also check to see if a collision is there. And we'll set up a function called isCollide, pass in that element object. And for now, we'll console log and over. So nice big over. Set up that function to detect if the two elements are colliding. So function is collide. And we're only passing in that one element value. So we can just give it a variable of a. Because you do need to have two elements, but we already know what the other element is, and that's that garbage one that we want to make that we've just created. So I'm going to actually put that into a constant variable. So just as we were selecting the other elements, we're going to select this, and we can use document get element by ID. So that way we don't have to specify it again. So now let's set up our rectangle. So selecting that element that we're passing in, we're going to get the bounding client rectangle. And also let's get the B rectangle for the element with an ID garbage. And the same thing, that get bounding client rectangle. So using that method, we can console log out the A rectangle if we wanted to, so we can find out more information about it. So let's try that out. So let's refresh and create one, drag it around, and you can see that this is that bound rectangle there that we're. So that every time we click it, essentially we're invoking the isCollide, and that's where we're outputting that rectangle information. And you can see there's all that information contained in here. So we can calculate out all of the corner edges of this particular element and see if there's any overlap with the other elements. And that's with element B, where we've also got all of that information. So we've got the top, height, left, right, top, and width. So let's calculate that out. And we're going to negate the value that we're returning. So let's make our calculations. So we've got our first element, and we've got a bottom position, and checking to see if it's less than the top position of the second element. We've got, again, our A elements, and we're going to check to see if that top position is larger than the bottom of the rectangle B. Or we're going to also check the horizontal, so checking to see if the right position is less than the rectangle left position. And using the get bounding client rectangle saves us the trouble of calculating where these corners are. So we see that we've got a left and a right and a top and a bottom. We also have the height and the width. So sometimes you see that height and width is used to calculate out those corners. But in this case, we don't have to do that because we do have the ability to calculate that out. And I forgot some of the brackets there. And then we're also going to do the opposite. So we're checking to see if rectangle left corner is greater than B rectangle right corner. So that takes care of the horizontal. And going back over to where we've got the collide value. So we can see that now, depending on what gets returned here, we can say, and then over here, I'm going to just say OK. And actually, I need to move this into the movement position. So that's why it's kind of choppy there. And it needs to actually be added in where we're checking to see on the mouse move. So let me save that and try that one more time. So now whenever I'm over, we see it's immediately over, and whenever I'm out, it's okay. So we've got our collision essentially happening. So the next part of it is to remove the element once the collision happens. So that's coming up in the next lesson. So for this lesson, try it out for yourself. Check to see if one element is overlapping the other element, and if it is, then you can pass in a message of over or whatever you want in the console. And if it's not, then you can pass in OK. And coming up next, we're going to do something with this condition.